This unauthorized drilling stops now. I am calling the sheriff and having you arrested for trespassing and theft of water.
I thought they said we were connected to the community well.
We are, aren't we?
Yes, this man is illegally tampering with the water supply on my property. He's armed with tools and refusing to leave. Send someone immediately. He can't just divert the water like this. It's clearly against the agreement. Ma'am, I understand, but I need you to calm down.
That purple primer is still wet.
Yes, sir. And this folder here has the approved well permit.
As you can see right here, this clearly states we have the senior rights.
There's no county stamp on this, ma'am. The text is unreadable.
My permit is filed and recorded.
I have the deed, the well permit, the survey, and video of a contractor digging across my property before sunrise. You had no right to access this valve.
It's my water line. I suggest you review the CC&Rs before making accusations.
All right, folks, let's keep it civil.
See the purple primer right here. They bypass the meter entirely.
No backflow preventer either.
The total came to just over $75,000.
This is unacceptable. We need an explanation now, Madam President.
Order, please. We will address every concern in due course.
This illegal water connection must be removed immediately under county supervision.
The first thing I saw that morning was the fence. Not an old fence, not something blown loose by a storm or dragged across the road by accident. This was brand new steel wire, fresh cedar posts, orange survey tape, and a white sign nailed right in the middle of my farm road that read, "Private property, no trespassing." Behind it sat 3 boulders big enough to stop a tractor. I killed the engine of my pickup and just stared through the windshield. That road had been there longer than I had. My father drove it when I was still small enough to sit beside him, with my boots dangling above the floorboard. My grandfather hauled hay across it. Every seed truck, every fertilizer delivery, every combine that touched my back field used that strip of gravel and dirt. And now, 2 weeks before harvest, my new neighbors had decided it belonged to them. Mark Caldwell came walking out of his yard like he had been waiting for me. His wife, Denise, stood behind him with her phone already recording. "You're done using this road," Mark said, loud enough for the camera. "This is our land now. You farmers don't get to drive wherever you want, just because nobody stopped you before." I stepped out slowly and kept my hands at my sides. "Mark," I said, "that is a recorded agricultural access road. It's in the deed. It's in the county records. You can't block it." He laughed like I had just told him a joke. "Then take me to court," he said. "By the time you prove anything, your corn will be rotting in that field." That was when I understood this was not a misunderstanding. This was not a misplaced fence or a bad survey line. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had waited until the weekend, after the county office closed, then blocked the only road wide enough for my equipment to reach the back 40 acres. Denise lowered her phone just long enough to smile. "Maybe next time," she said. "Buy land you can actually access." For a second, I wanted to tear that sign off the post with my bare hands. I wanted to drag those rocks out with a chain and let my tractor answer for me. But farmers learn patience the hard way. You do not survive drought, floods, broken equipment, and bad markets by losing your temper every time someone tries to push you. So I looked at the fence. I looked at the boulders. Then I looked at the little trail camera strapped to the cottonwood tree near the ditch. Mark did not notice it. That camera had watched him build the whole thing. He thought he had stolen a dirt road. What he had really done was block a recorded easement, damage a drainage ditch, interfere with harvest access, and put his name on a county enforcement file before breakfast. And by the time the sheriff, the surveyor, the attorney, and the insurance adjuster were finished with him, that little white sign would become the most expensive thing Mark Caldwell ever nailed to a post. My name is Ethan Miller, and I never wanted to be the kind of man who needed an attorney to protect a dirt road. I am not a developer. I am not a rich landowner sitting on property I barely visit. I am just a farmer in rural Missouri, trying to keep a small family farm alive, in a place where the weather can punish you, equipment breaks at the worst possible time, and one bad season can erase years of careful work. The farm was 63 acres when my father bought it in 1978. To some people, that might sound like a lot. But in farming, 63 acres is not an empire. It is enough to work yourself tired, enough to pay some bills when the year is kind, and enough to break your heart when the year turns against you. My father, Robert Miller, bought the place when the old dairy operation down the road was being split into parcels. The farmhouse was faded, the barn roof leaked, and the backfield could only be reached by a narrow farm road that curved along the eastern property line before opening into a long stretch of corn ground. Most buyers saw problems. My father saw a life. He spent his first summer hauling gravel in an old dump trailer and spreading it by hand with a shovel and rake. He cut back brush, dug drainage ditches, laid a small culvert near the low spot, and marked the edges with fence posts so delivery drivers would not sink into the mud after a hard rain. That road was never pretty. It was not paved. It did not have streetlights or a mailbox or a name on a Greene County sign. But it was the artery of the whole farm. Without it, the backfield was trapped. A combine could not squeeze through the front pasture. A grain truck could not cross the creek bed. Fertilizer rigs, seed deliveries, hay wagons, repair trucks, all of them needed that same strip of gravel and dirt. When I was a boy, I thought every farm had a road like that. I thought every child knew the sound of loose rock under truck tires before sunrise. I thought every father kept a folded plat map in the glove box and talked about property lines the way other men talked about baseball. My father would drive slow down that road, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on the open window, and he would point out things I was too young to understand. That ditch matters, he would say. That culvert matters. That gate matters. A farm only works when every road, every fence, and every boundary is respected. I did not know then that one day those words would sound less like advice and more like a warning. After he passed, I could have sold the place. Plenty of people told me to. Land values were climbing. People from the city were buying rural property and turning old farms into weekend homes with black fences, decorative barns, and signs with names like Willow Ridge or Sunset Acres. But I stayed because the farm was the last place where my father still felt close. His old work gloves were still hanging on a nail inside the barn. His pencil marks were still on the wall where he measured me every birthday until I was 16. The maple tree he planted for my mother was still shading the porch. And that farm road still carried the tire tracks of every season we had survived together. I was never trying to bother anyone. I kept to myself. I waved at passing trucks. I fixed my fences before my cattle could wander. I pulled people out of ditches in the winter and never sent a bill. When neighbors needed a generator during a storm, I brought one over. When the old couple on the west side needed their lane cleared after heavy snow, I cleared it before I cleared my own. That was how things worked out there. Then Mark and Denise Caldwell bought the house east of my farm. The old owner, Mr. Henley, had lived there for nearly 30 years. He understood the road. He knew my father. He knew harvest did not wait for anyone's comfort. If he saw dust rising from the farm road, he did not call it a nuisance. He called it October. The Caldwells were different from the first week. They arrived with moving trucks, landscapers, a white SUV that never seemed to get dirty, and a vision for the property that sounded more like a private retreat than a rural homestead. Mark told me he had worked in commercial real estate. Denise said they wanted peace, privacy, and a cleaner view. At first, I tried to be welcoming. I brought over a basket of tomatoes, sweet corn, and a jar of honey from a beekeeper friend. I told them if they ever needed help figuring out the well pump or the gravel lane, they could call me. Mark barely looked at the basket. He looked past me toward the farm road and asked, "How often do you drive equipment through there?" I told him the truth. More during planting and harvest, less the rest of the year. His face tightened, like I had just admitted to a crime. Denise said the dust was going to be a problem. Mark said they had paid too much for the property to have tractors running through their backyard. I explained calmly that the road had been there for decades and that it was a recorded agricultural access easement. He nodded in that polite way people nod when they are not listening. Over the next few months, the small comments started piling up. Denise complained about early morning engine noise. Mark complained about gravel kicked toward his grass. They complained about delivery trucks, fertilizer smell, the sight of hay equipment, even the fact that my work lights came on before sunrise during harvest. I tried to be fair. I slowed down near their house. I added fresh gravel to reduce dust. I told drivers not to idle near the property line. I did everything a reasonable neighbor could do without shutting down the farm itself. But some people do not want reasonable. They want control. And looking back, I think Mark had already decided that the road offended him simply because he could not command it. He had bought rural land thinking a deed gave him total power over everything he could see from his kitchen window. He did not understand that land carries history. It carries agreements. It carries recorded rights that do not disappear just because a new owner dislikes them. If you have ever dealt with a neighbor who thinks a property line is whatever they feel like enforcing that day, you already know how quickly politeness can turn into pressure. Leave a comment with what you would have done in my place, because at that point, I still believed calm conversations could keep the peace. I was wrong. While I was repairing equipment, watching the weather, and preparing for harvest, Mark was studying fence companies, survey flags, and ways to make my access problem look like his private property issue. He did not come at me with a lawsuit first. He came at me with a fence. The first warning came in an email Mark sent on a Wednesday night. The subject line said, "Unauthorized use of Caldwell property." I was standing in the equipment shed when I read it, grease still on my hands from fixing a bearing on the corn head. Mark claimed my tractors, delivery trucks, and farm vehicles had been crossing his land without permission. He said the road was not public, not shared, and not mine. Then he demanded I stop using it immediately. At the bottom, he wrote one sentence that told me exactly what kind of man I was dealing with. "Your family's habits do not override my property rights." I did not fire back. I waited until morning, scanned the old plat map, and replied politely. I explained that the road was a recorded agricultural access easement, used openly for decades before either of us owned our parcels. I offered to meet him, walk the line, and review the documents together. He never answered. Instead, he started watching the road. Every time I drove by, Mark appeared near his fence line with his phone out. If a delivery truck came through, he filmed the plates. If my hired hand drove the tractor past his yard, Mark stood there with his arms crossed, like he was guarding a border crossing. One fertilizer driver called me afterward and said, "Your neighbor's acting like I robbed a bank." That was Mark's first real weapon. Not the fence. The pressure. He wanted to make the road so uncomfortable to use that I would give it up without a fight. Then came the invoice. It arrived in my mailbox in a white envelope with Caldwell printed neatly in the corner. Inside was a one-page demand for $18,700 for unauthorized land use, dust nuisance, loss of privacy, and surface damage. He had charged me for using a farm road my father maintained before Mark even knew that land existed. He had charged me for dust on a gravel road in farm country. He had charged me for the emotional discomfort of seeing tractors during harvest season. At the bottom, he warned that if I did not pay within 10 days, he would pursue legal action and physical exclusion remedies. 2 days later, I learned what he meant. It was Friday afternoon, the kind of late September day when every farmer in the county watches the forecast like a countdown clock. Rain was supposed to move in by Monday. If I could get into the backfield over the weekend, I could start cutting before the ground softened. If I lost access, I would lose days. Around 4 o'clock, I heard diesel engines down by the east line. A fence crew had pulled in beside the Caldwell house with a skid steer, rolls of wire, cedar posts, and a flatbed trailer carrying large landscape boulders. Mark stood beside them in sunglasses, pointing toward my farm road like he owned the whole county. By the time I drove down there, they had already set the first posts across the entrance. I told the crew foreman there was a recorded easement through that area. He looked uncomfortable right away. "I'm just doing what the property owner hired us to do," he said. Then Mark walked over. "This is not your road," he said. "It is an access easement," I told him. "You have my email. You have the map. I have a survey," he snapped. "Then read the exceptions in your deed." His jaw tightened. Denise came out onto the porch with her phone raised, recording from an angle that made Mark look like the victim and me look like the angry farmer. Mark raised his voice for the camera. This man has been trespassing across our property for years, and today we are securing our land. That was when I understood what he was doing. He was not just blocking the road. He was creating a story. I kept my voice low. Mark, if you block this access, you are interfering with harvest. That field cannot be reached safely any other way. He smiled. Sounds like a design flaw in your farm. The fence crew kept working. Post after post went into the ground. Wire stretched across the road. The skid steer pushed one boulder into place, then another, until the entrance looked less like a fence line and more like a barricade. I could have cut the wire. I could have chained those rocks to my truck and dragged them out, but that was exactly what Mark wanted. He wanted footage of me losing my temper so he could call the sheriff and pretend this was criminal trespass instead of a recorded access dispute. So I stood there and watched. That was one of the hardest things I have ever done. On the other side of that fence was my crop. Months of seed, fuel, fertilizer, repairs, labor, and hope. Corn does not care about lawsuits. Weather does not wait for county records, and Mark knew that. That was why he picked Friday. By the time the last post was set, the county office was closed. The recorder's office was closed. Most attorneys were already gone for the weekend. Mark had timed it so I would have to sit with the damage, trapped and angry, while he enjoyed 2 days of control. Before leaving, he tapped the new sign with 2 fingers. Private property, he said. No trespassing. That includes you, your trucks, your hired hands, and whatever rusty machines you think give you special rights. The next morning, the real damage began. A seed company truck had to turn around at the end of the lane after Mark blocked it with his white SUV and threatened to sue the company. A mechanic refused to cross the dispute line after seeing the signs. The fertilizer supplier delayed delivery until I could confirm legal access. Every call felt like another board, nailed across that road. By Sunday afternoon, dark clouds gathered in the west. I stood at the blocked entrance and watched the wind move through the corn in my back field. The stalks were ready. The ears were heavy. The timing was right, and I could not reach them. Then Mark made it worse. That evening, he had a dump truck deliver gravel and fill dirt along the low side of the road. I watched as the driver poured material into the shallow drainage ditch my father had dug decades earlier to keep water moving away from the field. I yelled for them to stop. Mark just waved. Denise shouted from the porch, "We're improving our property." But they were not improving anything. They were choking the ditch. That night, the rain came hard. It hammered the roof and ran down the slope in sheets. I barely slept. At dawn, I pulled on my boots and walked out with a flashlight. Water had backed up near the blocked ditch and spread into the low corner of my field. Mud pooled where equipment needed to turn. The road surface on my side had started washing out because the water had nowhere to go. That was when my anger turned cold. Mark had crossed from arrogance into damage. When I walked back toward the house, he was standing by the new fence in a rain jacket, holding a mug of coffee like he had come to admire his work. "Looks wet over there," he said. "You filled the drainage ditch," I told him. "No," he said. "I maintained my land. You caused water to back up into my field." He shrugged. "Maybe you should have thought about access before planting where you couldn't get to it." That sentence told me everything. He knew the timing. He knew the pressure. He knew what would happen if I lost the road during harvest, and he was enjoying it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Rain dripped from the brim of my cap. Water moved around my boots. Behind him, that new white sign looked bright, clean, and stupid. Then Mark leaned closer to the fence. "You farmers always act tough," he said. "But at the end of the day, you need permission just like everyone else." I did not answer. I turned around, walked back to the house, and went straight to the old oak filing cabinet in my father's office. The bottom drawer stuck like it always had. I pulled it open and started going through folders marked in my father's handwriting. Taxes, seed receipts, equipment manuals, insurance. Then, at the very back, behind a stack of old county maps, I found a yellow envelope held shut with a rusted paperclip. Across the front, in my father's blocky handwriting, were 5 words: "Access road, do not lose." I stood there holding it while rain hit the window behind me, and for the first time since Mark put up that fence, I smiled. I carried that yellow envelope to the kitchen table like it weighed 50 pounds. Outside, rain kept tapping against the windows. The low corner of my field was still flooding. The new fence was still standing, and Mark Caldwell was probably sitting in his clean kitchen, believing he had outsmarted a farmer with a weekend and a few cedar posts. But when I opened that envelope, the whole story changed. Inside were papers my father had kept for decades, a copy of the 1978 deed, an old county plat map, a hand-drawn sketch of the road with measurements written in pencil, a receipt for gravel from 1986, a letter from the previous landowner confirming farm access, and at the bottom, protected in a plastic sleeve, was the document that made my hands go still. Recorded agricultural access easement. It was not a handshake agreement. It was not a neighborly favor. It was not some rural tradition Mark could laugh off, because the road was made of dirt instead of asphalt. It was recorded. The easement described the exact strip of land running along the eastern boundary, wide enough for agricultural equipment, connecting my back field to the main lane. It gave the owner of my parcel the right to access, maintain, repair, and improve the road for farm use. I read it 3 times before I let myself breathe. Then I stopped being angry and started being careful. The first thing I did was make copies. I scanned every page, photographed every signature, every recording stamp, every legal description, and saved everything in 3 places. My father had written, "Do not lose," on the envelope. I was not going to lose anything. Then I walked back outside and documented the damage. I took wide shots of the blocked road, close-ups of the new posts, photos of the boulders, photos of the no trespassing sign, photos of the fill dirt dumped into the drainage ditch, photos of the water backing into my field. Every picture had a time and date attached. I did not touch the fence. I did not move the rocks. I did not give Mark the satisfaction of turning me into the angry trespasser he wanted on video. Then I remembered the trail camera. Most people think trail cams are just for deer and coyotes, but farmers use them for gates, fuel tanks, equipment yards, and remote corners where you cannot stand watch all day. I had one strapped to a cottonwood tree near the ditch, angled toward the road, because years earlier we had trouble with people dumping trash there. I pulled the memory card and opened it on my laptop. There he was. Friday, 4:12 p.m. Mark walking ahead of the fence crew, pointing at the road. Friday, 4:37 p.m. The skid steer pushing the first boulder into place. Friday, 5:06 p.m. Denise standing on the porch with her phone raised. Friday, 5:42 p.m. Mark tapping the no trespassing sign after the crew finished. Then the next evening, the dump truck. The camera caught it backing up along the low side of the road. It caught the bed lifting. It caught the fill dirt sliding into the drainage ditch. It even caught Mark standing there with one hand on his hip, watching the driver bury the channel my father had dug to move stormwater away from the crop ground. That footage mattered more than any argument I could make. Mark could claim he was confused. He could claim the crew misunderstood. He could claim he was only improving his yard. But video has a way of stripping excuses down to silence. By Monday morning, I was at the county recorder's office as soon as the doors opened. The clerk behind the counter knew my family name before I finished explaining. In small counties, land records and last names travel together. I gave her the legal description from my deed and the Caldwell parcel number. She pulled the records, typed for a while, then printed several pages and slid them across the counter. There it was again. The easement was not only real, it was still attached to the land. She showed me where it appeared in the chain of title. She showed me the recording information. She showed me that when the Caldwell property changed hands, it had been transferred subject to existing easements and restrictions. In plain English, Mark had bought the property with my access road already written into it. He could dislike it. He could complain about it. But he could not erase it with cedar posts and a sign. From there, I hired a licensed surveyor named Bill Ramsey. Bill had surveyed half the farms in the county and had the permanent squint of a man who spent his life looking across fields in bright sun. I showed him the deed, the plat, the easement, and the photos of Mark's fence. Bill turned the pages slowly, then leaned back and said, "I remember this road." Those 4 words hit me harder than I expected. He told me his father had worked with my father years ago when one of the boundary pins was reset near that access strip. But surveyors do not work on memory. They work on records, measurements, monuments, and evidence on the ground. So I hired him to mark the line properly. 2 days later, Bill came out with GPS equipment, a metal detector, and an assistant carrying stakes. They found old iron pins hidden under grass and dirt. They matched them against the recorded plat. They measured the road, the fence, the ditch, and the boulders. Mark came outside halfway through, looking irritated. "What is this?" he asked. Bill did not look up. "Survey work. I already have a survey." Bill finally glanced at him. "Then this one should make you feel better." It did not. By the end of the day, Bill had marked the easement edges with bright stakes and flagging. The results were worse for Mark than I expected. The farm road sat exactly where the recorded easement said it should be. The fence posts blocked the access strip directly, and along the southern end, part of Mark's new fence crossed several feet onto my side of the boundary. Not only had he blocked my road, he had overbuilt. Bill gave me a preliminary sketch and told me the formal survey report would follow. Then I sent everything to an agricultural attorney named Linda Harper. She was not loud. She was not dramatic. She did not promise revenge. She asked for documents, dates, names, photos, videos, invoices, crop records, delivery schedules, weather reports, and every message Mark had sent. That alone told me she knew what she was doing. I forwarded the email about unauthorized use, the fake invoice, screenshots of every text, photos of the fence, trail cam footage, county records, Bill's survey notes, canceled delivery messages, the mechanic's refusal to cross the dispute line, the fertilizer delay, the weather forecast, photos of standing water in the field. Linda called me the next afternoon. For a moment, she was quiet. Then she said, "Ethan, this is not just a neighbor being difficult." I waited. He blocked a recorded easement during harvest season, after receiving notice that the access existed. He obstructed agricultural operations, interfered with deliveries, and appears to have altered drainage in a way that caused damage to your field. That is very different from two neighbors arguing over a dirt path. I sat down at the kitchen table. For the first time in days, I felt the ground come back under my feet. Linda told me not to confront Mark, not to threaten him, not to touch the fence, not to move the boulders, not to give him any footage he could twist. "Let the documents talk," she said. "Let the survey talk. Let the county records talk." So that was what I did. While Mark walked around like he had won, I built a binder. Deeds and easement, county records, survey evidence, photos and video, crop and delivery losses, drainage damage, communications from Mark Caldwell. Every page was labeled. Every image had a date. Every file had a backup. Every phone call got written down with the time, the person I spoke with, and what they said. That week, I also called the county road and drainage office. I sent them photos of the filled ditch and water spreading into my field. The man I spoke with did not make promises, but his tone changed when I explained that the obstruction sat inside a recorded agricultural access easement. Then he asked one question that stayed with me. Did they have a permit for the fence work near that access? I checked. There was no permit. Then I called the utility locate service. They had no record of a locate request from Mark or the fence contractor before the posts went in. That mattered because old underground lines ran near that part of the property, including a buried electrical line feeding a field pump from my father's time. By then, the case was no longer small. Recorded easement, blocked access, no permit, drainage alteration, possible utility issue, harvest delay, documented intent, and then Mark handed me one more piece without realizing it. Denise had posted in a local Facebook group, "Finally shut down the farmer's illegal shortcut through our land. Some people need to learn boundaries." In the photo, Mark stood beside the new sign with his arms crossed, smiling like a man who had conquered something. The comments were worse. When someone asked whether the road had been used before they bought the property, Mark replied, "Yes, but old habits don't create rights." When another person asked if blocking it would hurt my harvest, he wrote, "Maybe that will teach him to stay off land he doesn't own." I screenshotted everything, not because I wanted internet drama, because intent matters. Linda's first demand letter went out 2 days later. It identified the easement, demanded immediate removal of the obstruction, demanded restoration of drainage, and instructed Mark to preserve all communications, contractor records, photos, videos, invoices, and messages related to the fence. Mark received it on a Thursday. That evening, As I was checking the water line near the barn, he walked to the edge of the new fence holding the envelope in one hand. He tore it in half while looking straight at me. Then he said, "Good luck proving a dirt path is worth anything." I did not respond. I just looked at the camera on the cottonwood tree, then back at him. Because what Mark did not understand was simple. The value was never in the dirt. The value was in the access. And he had just given me proof that he knew exactly what he was taking. The legal turn did not happen in a courtroom. It happened at my kitchen table, under a yellow light, with rain still hanging in the air, and a stack of documents spread out in front of my attorney like cards in a losing poker hand. Only Mark Caldwell did not know he was losing yet. Linda Harper had asked me to bring everything again. The deed, the recorded easement, the survey sketch, the trail cam footage, the Facebook screenshots, the fake invoice, the canceled delivery records, the photos of the flooded corner of my field, the weather reports from the weekend Mark blocked the road. She went through them one by one, slowly, without drama. That was what made her so unsettling. Mark was loud. Mark performed. Mark leaned on confidence like confidence could replace law. Linda just read. After nearly an hour, she tapped the easement document with the end of her pen. "This is the part he missed," she said. I leaned forward. The language was old, formal, and dry enough to make most people skim past it. But Linda read it out loud, word by word. The easement did not merely allow passage. It granted the owner of my parcel the right to access, maintain, repair, and improve the farm road for agricultural operations, including equipment, supplies, livestock, drainage, and seasonal crop activity. I had read the document before, but hearing an attorney say it changed the weight of every sentence. "So it's not just that I can drive through," I said. "No," Linda said. "It means you have a protected right to keep that access usable for farming." He did not just block a path. He obstructed a recorded agricultural easement and interfered with the specific purpose it was created for. That was the first turn. The second turn came from Mark's own purchase records. Linda had requested the title documents connected to the Caldwell sale. When they arrived, she called me in. On page 7 of the title commitment, under exceptions, the easement was listed clearly. Not hidden, not vague, not buried in some forgotten drawer. Recorded agricultural access easement, dated 1978. Same book, same page, same legal description. Mark had bought his property, subject to that easement. He could not honestly say, nobody told him. Either he had seen it and ignored it, or he had failed to read the most important part of his own closing papers. Neither version helped him. "That matters," Linda said, "because once he had notice, his conduct looks intentional." Intentional. That word sat in the room for a moment. A neighbor making a mistake is one thing. A neighbor blocking a known easement during harvest season, after being warned, after receiving records, after posting online that he wanted to teach me a lesson, is something else entirely. Then came the third turn. Bill Ramsey's final survey report arrived with maps, measurements, boundary points, photos, and a conclusion that made the situation even worse for the Caldwells. The road was inside the recorded easement. The boulders were inside the recorded easement. The fence posts were inside the recorded easement. And on the southern end, several posts crossed past the Caldwell boundary and sat on my land. Mark had been shouting about property rights while physically occupying mine. I remember staring at that page longer than necessary. For days, he had talked to me like I was some backward farmer, too dumb to understand a line on a map. He had stood by that fence, smiling, telling me I needed permission. He had let Denise film him as if he were defending his land from a trespasser. And all that time, part of his brand new fence was on my side of the line. Linda looked at the report and said, "That is going to be difficult for him to explain." But the legal turn was not finished. The county permit search came back next. There was no fence permit. There was no approved site plan. There was no record showing Mark had permission to place a structure across a recorded access strip. And there was no utility locate request before the fence contractor drove posts near old underground service lines. That brought in another layer of trouble. It meant Mark had not just picked a fight with me. He had exposed his contractor, and possibly himself, to county violations and safety issues. Then the drainage photos made their own argument. Before Mark dumped fill dirt, the ditch along the road carried stormwater away from my low field corner. My father had designed it that way because he understood water better than most engineers I had met. Water does not negotiate. It goes where gravity and obstruction send it. After Mark filled the ditch, the rain backed up exactly where the trail cam and my photos showed the material had been dumped. Linda asked me for crop records from previous years, yield maps, field notes, any documentation showing normal drainage patterns. I found what I could. Old photos from planting, a crop consultant's notes, aerial images, even repair receipts from the culvert my father had installed years earlier. When Linda placed those beside the new flood photos, the pattern was clear. Mark had not just blocked movement, he had changed water flow. That meant possible property damage, crop loss, and county drainage enforcement. And then came the piece Mark gave us himself, the Facebook post. Linda printed it in color. Denise's caption was bad enough. Finally shut down the farmer's illegal shortcut through our land. Some people need to learn boundaries. But Mark's comments were worse. Yes, but old habits don't create rights. Maybe that will teach him to stay off land he doesn't own. Harvest timing is not our problem. Linda placed those screenshots next to my email, where I had informed Mark of the easement before he built the fence. Then she circled the dates. My email came first. The fence came second. The social media bragging came third. The demand letter came fourth. Mark tearing up the letter came fifth. That was not confusion. That was a timeline. A very expensive timeline. Linda prepared a second demand letter, and this one was not polite in the way the first one had been. It was still professional, still controlled, but it carried the weight of a file that had grown teeth. It demanded that Mark and Denise remove all obstructions from the easement, restore the farm road, restore the drainage ditch, remove any fence portions on my land, preserve all evidence, disclose the fence contractor's information, notify their homeowner's insurance carrier, and compensate me for documented losses. It also warned that if they failed to act, we would seek emergency court relief because harvest access was time-sensitive. When Mark received that letter, he did what arrogant people often do when the facts turn against them. He tried to change the arena. He called the sheriff. I saw the deputy's cruiser pull up near the blocked entrance around noon. Mark walked out first, waving papers and pointing toward me, before I had even reached the road. Denise stood on the porch, recording again. When I got there, Mark was already talking. He keeps threatening to trespass, Mark said. I want him warned formally. This is my property, and I want him kept off. The deputy turned to me. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I handed him a copy of the easement, the county record printout, and Bill's survey sketch. The deputy read quietly while Mark kept trying to interrupt. Sir, the deputy finally said to him, I'm trying to understand the documents. Mark crossed his arms. It's my land, he said. That's all that matters. The deputy looked at the survey again. According to this, there is a recorded access easement here. Mark scoffed. A dirt path. A recorded access easement, the deputy repeated. Then he looked toward the fence and the boulders, and those appear to be blocking it. Denise lowered her phone. For the first time, Mark's face changed. Not fear yet, but irritation with a crack in it. The deputy did not arrest anyone. He did not order the fence removed on the spot. That was not his role, and Linda had warned me not to expect television drama from real legal processes. But he made a report, and that report mattered. It documented that Mark had called law enforcement to accuse me of trespass, and that when deputies arrived, I produced recorded documents showing lawful access, while Mark's fence and boulders blocked that access. In other words, Mark had invited an official witness to his own problem. Before leaving, the deputy gave Mark a careful warning. This looks civil, but you need to be careful about blocking recorded access. I would strongly suggest you speak to an attorney before this goes any further. Mark's answer was pure Mark. County records don't mean anything if the land is mine. The deputy paused. Linda later told me that sentence was not legally useful for him. The next morning, a county truck pulled in. Not a sheriff, not my attorney, county code enforcement. A man in a reflective vest stepped out with a clipboard, a camera, and the calm expression of someone who had heard every property excuse in the book. Mark came outside fast. I stayed on my side and watched. The inspector took photos of the fence, photos of the boulders, photos of the sign, photos of the ditch. He measured distances from the road edge and marked points on a printed map. Then he walked the line where Bill had placed survey flags. Mark followed him, talking the entire time. This is private property. It's just a fence. The farmer is exaggerating. He has other ways in. He's trying to bully us because we're new. The inspector finally stopped and said, "Do you have a permit for this work?" Mark's mouth opened, then closed. "It's a farm fence," he said. "It is a constructed obstruction across a recorded access area, with drainage alteration," the inspector replied. "Do you have a permit or approved plan?" Mark did not. Then the inspector asked whether utility locate had been called before the posts were set. Mark looked toward the house, as if Denise might somehow have an answer. She did not. The inspector wrote something down. That clipboard became the first thing Mark could not laugh at. By the end of the visit, County Code Enforcement had opened a case. The drainage office wanted to inspect the ditch. The survey report was being reviewed. The fence contractor's name was requested, and Mark was told not to do additional work in the easement area until the county finished reviewing the records. That was when the power shifted. Not loudly, not with shouting, not with some dramatic courtroom scene. It shifted in the quiet way. Real consequences often arrive. Paper by paper, file by file, signature by signature. For weeks, Mark had acted like the road was worthless because it was dirt. But the dirt was not the point. The point was the legal right running over it. The point was the recorded document he ignored. The point was the harvest he tried to trap. The point was the ditch he buried. The point was the contractor he hired without checking permits. The point was the sheriff's report he accidentally created. The point was the county case now carrying his name. Mark thought farmers were easy to push because we spend more time fixing equipment than talking about lawsuits. He thought patience meant weakness. He thought silence meant surrender. But farmers understand records better than people think. We keep receipts because parts fail. We keep weather logs because rain matters. We keep maps because land is never just land. We keep old envelopes in old cabinets because somewhere inside them might be the one document that keeps a greedy neighbor from stealing the road your father built. And Mark Caldwell had just learned that the hardest person to bully is not the loudest one. It is the one who knows exactly where the boundary is. By the time County Code Enforcement opened the case, Mark Caldwell stopped smiling at the fence. He still tried to act confident. He still walked across his yard with that stiff, important stride, phone in hand, sunglasses on, even when the sky was gray. But something had changed. Before, he looked at the farm road like a man protecting what was his. Now he looked at it like a man realizing every post, every boulder, and every shovel of dirt had become evidence. The first official inspection happened on a cold morning after 2 more days of rain. A county code enforcement officer named Paul Mercer came out with a clipboard, a camera, and a printed copy of the parcel map. A drainage technician came with him, along with a county survey assistant who carried measuring equipment and bright marking paint. I stayed near my side of the road with Linda Harper on speakerphone. She had given me clear instructions. Do not argue. Do not interrupt. Do not perform for Mark's camera. Let the officials do their work. Mark did not follow the same advice. The moment Paul stepped toward the fence, Mark hurried out of the house. "This is private property," he said. "That farmer is trying to use the county to harass us." Paul did not react. He just introduced himself, explained the complaint, and asked Mark for the fence permit. Mark folded his arms. "It's a fence," he said. "People build fences." Paul looked at the posts, then at the boulders, then at the sign blocking the road. "People also need permits when a structure obstructs a recorded access area or affects drainage," he said. "Do you have one?" Mark did not. Then the drainage technician walked to the low ditch line and crouched near the fresh-filled dirt. He pushed a probe into the ground, looked at the water standing against the road edge, and asked who had placed the material there. Mark said it was landscaping. The technician looked up. Landscaping does not usually block an agricultural drainage channel. Denise had come outside by then, wrapped in a coat, recording from the porch. But this time, her phone did not bother me. She was not filming an angry farmer. She was filming county officials documenting a violation. The survey assistant followed Bill Ramsey's flags and compared them with the county map. He marked several points in orange paint. One mark landed directly beneath Mark's fence line. Another landed where one of the boulders sat inside the easement. A third mark showed the corner where the fence crossed over onto my side. Paul took a long breath and wrote something on his clipboard. Mark kept talking. He has other ways into that field, he said. He just wants the convenient way. I almost laughed, but I did not. Paul turned to me. Mr. Miller, is there another access wide enough for your combine and grain trucks? No, I said. Not safely. Not without crossing soft ground and risking equipment damage. That is why the easement exists. I handed him a copy of the recorded easement and Bill's survey report. He reviewed the first page, then the map, then looked back at Mark. This is recorded, Paul said. Snapped. That does not mean he gets to do whatever he wants. No, Paul said. It means you do not get to block it. That was the first time someone in authority said it out loud in front of him. Mark's face went red. The inspection lasted nearly 2 hours. They photographed the fence from every angle. They photographed the boulders, the sign, the fresh fill, the washed-out edge of my road, and the water backed into the field. They asked for the fence contractor's name. Mark said he did not remember the company. Paul looked at the new posts, the clean wire, and the equipment tracks still visible in the mud. You hired them last week, he said. Mark said he would look it up. By the end of the visit, Paul handed Mark a written notice. It ordered him to stop all work in the easement area, provide contractor information, produce any permits or site plans, and remove the obstruction pending review. It also warned that daily fines could begin if he failed to comply. Mark read the notice like it was written in another language. This is insane, he said. Paul's answer was calm. What is insane is building across a recorded access easement without checking the records. The sheriff's report came next. The deputy who had responded to Mark's trespass call had filed his incident report, and Linda got a copy. It stated exactly what happened. Mark accused me of trespass. I produced recorded easement documents. The fence and boulders appeared to obstruct that access, and Mark was advised to seek legal counsel before escalating. Linda said the report was valuable because it showed Mark had used law enforcement as a weapon, only to have the official record point back at him. Then Mark's fence contractor got pulled into the mess. Once county code enforcement requested the contractor's information, Mark finally gave them the name. The company owner called me 3 days later, nervous and apologetic. He said Mark had told him there was no easement, no dispute, and no issue with the boundary. He said Mark had insisted the job needed to be done before the weekend. I did not argue with him. I told him my attorney would handle communication. Linda sent a preservation letter to the contractor. She requested work orders, texts, emails, invoices, site notes, payment records, and any photos taken before or during installation. A week later, those records made Mark's story worse. There was a text from the contractor asking, "Are you sure this doesn't block the farm access road?" Mark had replied, "It's on my land. Build it." Another text asked whether Mark wanted to wait until Monday to confirm with the county. Mark wrote back, "No, I want it done before the farmer starts harvest." When Linda showed me that message, I had to stand up and walk around the room. There it was in his own words. Not a mistake, not confusion, a plan. The insurance company entered the picture after that. Linda had demanded that Mark notify his homeowner's carrier because the claim now included property damage, drainage interference, loss of use, crop-related expenses, and potential liability from obstructing a recorded easement. At first, Mark apparently told the adjuster this was a simple neighbor dispute over a private road. Then the adjuster received our packet: the deed, the easement, the survey, the trail cam images, the contractor texts, the sheriff's report, the county notice, the Facebook screenshots, the photos of the flooded field. The tone changed quickly. The adjuster called Linda instead of calling Mark. He asked for crop records, repair estimates, lost delivery documentation, and proof of additional costs caused by the blocked access. He also asked whether Mark had been warned about the easement before constructing the fence. Linda sent him my email, the email Mark ignored, the one with the plat map attached, the one that politely offered to walk the line before any of this happened. That email became another nail in the box Mark had built around himself. 2 weeks later, we all ended up in a meeting at the county office. Not a courtroom. Not a dramatic trial. Just a plain conference room with fluorescent lights, a long table, and a county seal on the wall. But to me, that room felt heavier than any courtroom I had ever imagined. On one side sat me, Linda, Bill Ramsey, and the drainage technician. On the other side sat Mark and Denise. Mark did not bring an attorney. That surprised Linda, but it did not surprise me. Mark had spent the whole dispute believing confidence was the same thing as being right. Paul from Code Enforcement opened the meeting by reviewing the issue. He did not use emotional language. He did not call Mark greedy. He did not talk about my father, my crop, or the stress of watching water spread into a field I could not reach. He simply went through the facts. A recorded agricultural access easement existed. The Caldwell property had been purchased subject to that easement. A fence, boulders, and signage had been placed across the access. Drainage had been altered. No permit had been found. No utility locate record had been found. Survey evidence showed obstruction and possible encroachment. Mark kept interrupting. That road is ugly. It cuts too close to our house. We paid for privacy. He can use smaller equipment. This is not the 1970s anymore. Finally, Linda opened the title commitment and slid it across the table. Mr. Caldwell, she said, this was in your closing documents. Mark looked down. For the first time in the entire dispute, he had nothing immediate to say. Linda pointed to the exception line. You purchased the property subject to this easement. My client did not create it after you moved in. He did not invent it. He did not hide it. It was recorded decades before you bought your home. Denise whispered something to Mark, but he did not answer her. Then Bill explained the survey, calmly, professionally. No anger. He showed where the road fell, where the easement ran, where the fence blocked it, where the southern posts crossed the line. Mark tried one last argument. My survey showed my boundary. Bill nodded. Your boundary does not eliminate an easement, and it does not allow you to build onto Mr. Miller's land. The room went quiet. That sentence landed harder than shouting ever could have. By the end of the meeting, the county issued its requirements. Mark had to remove the boulders and the obstruction from the easement. He had to stop preventing agricultural access. He had to provide a plan for restoring the drainage ditch. He had to address the unpermitted fence work. And he had to move any part of the fence that crossed onto my property. If he failed, fines would begin. If the drainage issue remained, the county could escalate enforcement. If he continued blocking the road, Linda was ready to file for emergency injunctive relief. Mark walked out of that meeting pale and furious. He did not look at me. Denise did. For a moment, her expression was not smug anymore. It was smaller, tighter, like she was just beginning to understand that recording everything had not protected them. It had preserved the evidence. The next morning, a crew came to remove the boulders. I stood by the barn and watched from a distance. The skid steer lifted them one by one, carrying away the same rocks Mark had used to trap my harvest. Then workers cut sections of wire and pulled posts from the ground. The road began to appear again. Not clean, not fixed, but visible. For the first time in weeks, I could see the line of gravel curving toward my backfield. But Mark was not finished making mistakes. That evening, after the county crew had left and the sun dropped behind the tree line, I saw headlights near the easement. Then I heard chains, metal scraping, a truck engine revving. I walked out with my flashlight and my phone already recording. Mark had hired 2 men to pull out the remaining fence sections himself. They were rushing, angry, and careless. One of them hooked a chain too low around a post near the drainage ditch. When the truck yanked forward, the post came out with a violent snap. Then the ground caved around the old culvert. The culvert my father had installed more than 30 years earlier buckled under the force, cracking the edge and collapsing part of the ditch wall. Water began to move the wrong way almost immediately. I stood there in the dark, recording. Mark saw me and shouted, "You got what you wanted." No. What I wanted was my road left alone. What he had just given me was more damage, on video, after county notice, inside the same easement he had already been ordered not to disturb. The next morning, I sent the footage to Linda. She watched it once and said, "He just made the settlement more expensive. The culvert was the final mistake." Until that night, Mark could still pretend some of it had been confusion. He could claim he misunderstood the easement. He could blame the fence contractor. He could say he only wanted privacy, only wanted control of his yard, only wanted to protect what he thought was his. But once he damaged the culvert after the county had already warned him to stop disturbing the easement area, there was no clean way to explain it. The next morning, Linda sent the video to County Code Enforcement. the drainage office, and Mark's insurance adjuster. By noon, Paul Mercer was back on the property. This time, he did not spend much time talking to Mark. He photographed the collapsed edge of the ditch. He photographed the broken culvert. He photographed the muddy water pooling where it should have been draining. Then he looked at the earlier inspection notes and compared them to the new damage. Mark tried to interrupt. Paul held up one hand. "Mr. Caldwell, you were instructed not to perform additional work in this area without approval." Mark said, "I was removing the fence like you told me to." Paul looked down at the damaged culvert. "You were told to remove the obstruction. You were not told to damage drainage infrastructure." That sentence cost Mark more than he understood at the time. Within a week, the situation was no longer something he could control by acting confident. His insurance company assigned a larger claim review. The county issued a written drainage correction notice. The fence contractor sent Linda records proving Mark had rushed the job and ignored warnings about the farm access road. Bill Ramsey updated his survey packet with the damaged culvert location, and my crop consultant documented the water damage in the low corner of the field. Linda gave Mark one final chance to settle before filing in court. The settlement demand was not emotional. It was not revenge fantasy. It was a list. Remove all obstructions from the recorded easement. Restore the farm road surface. Repair the drainage ditch and replace the damaged culvert. Move every fence post off my land and out of the easement. Pay for the survey. Pay for the emergency road repair. Pay for the crop loss documented in the flooded section. Pay for delayed delivery costs, extra equipment costs, and legal fees. Sign a written acknowledgement that the agricultural access easement was valid and could not be blocked again. Mark refused at first. Of course he did. He told Linda the number was outrageous. He said I was taking advantage of him. He said farmers always exaggerated losses. He said the county was biased because my family had lived there longer. But his own insurance adjuster had the documents. His own contractor had the texts. The county had the inspection reports. The sheriff's office had the incident report. The internet had the screenshots Denise thought were harmless. And I had the trail cam footage. A man can argue with a neighbor all day. It is much harder to argue with 5 separate records telling the same story. The pressure finally broke him when Linda prepared the emergency injunction filing. If it went before a judge, Mark risked a court order, additional fees, and a public record that would follow the property. His insurance company also made it clear that intentional conduct might create problems for coverage. That was the first time Mark stopped acting like the smartest man in the room. The settlement happened quietly. No courtroom speech, no dramatic confession. Just signatures, checks, contractor schedules, county follow-ups, and a written agreement that said what I had been saying since the beginning. The road was a recorded agricultural access easement, and the Caldwells had no right to block it. The cost hurt them. They had to pay for a new culvert, proper ditch restoration, fresh gravel, survey fees, part of my crop loss, delivery delays, attorney fees, and the removal and relocation of their fence. The county also fined the fence contractor for the unpermitted work, and word spread fast enough that the company lost a planned job with a small subdivision outside town. Denise deleted the Facebook post. But screenshots do not disappear just because pride does. For months afterward, people at the feed store, the co-op, and the diner knew exactly what had happened. Nobody yelled at the Caldwells. Nobody had to. In a rural county, reputation moves slower than gossip, but lasts much longer. Mark and Denise still lived next door, but they stopped standing outside when I drove through. They stopped filming. They stopped waving papers. They stopped using the words illegal shortcut. A new sign eventually went up near the road. Not mine. The county required marker. Recorded agricultural access. Do not obstruct. The first time I drove through after the repairs were finished, I went slowly. The gravel was fresh under the tires. The ditch was open again. The culvert carried water the way it was supposed to. The fence had been moved back where it belonged. Beyond the bend, the back field waited in the morning light. I thought about my father. I thought about him hauling gravel in that old dump trailer, measuring the ditch by eye, telling me that a farm only works when every road, every fence, and every boundary is respected. Back then, I thought he was teaching me how to maintain land. Now I understand. He was teaching me how to defend it. I did not win because I was louder than Mark. I did not win because I threatened him. I did not win because I tore down his fence in anger. even though part of me wanted to. I won because I kept the paperwork. I kept the photos. I kept the video. I called the right offices. I let the survey speak. I let the county records speak. And I refused to let a greedy neighbor turn my patience into surrender. That road still looks like nothing special to most people. Just gravel, dirt, ditch grass, and tire tracks. But to me, it is proof that land remembers. Records matter. Boundaries matter. And sometimes the smallest road on a farm can carry the full weight of the law. So if you ever find yourself dealing with a neighbor who thinks they can move a line, block an easement, cut off access, or bully you into giving up what is legally yours, do not start by shouting. Start by documenting. Find the deed. Find the survey. Check the county records. Save every message. Take every photo. Because the person who thinks they can steal your road is usually counting on you to get angry before you get organized. Mark Caldwell learned the hard way that farmers may be quiet, but we are not careless. And when you mess with the road that keeps a farm alive, you are not just moving dirt, you are stepping onto a line you may not be able to cross back from. If this story made you think about property rights, bad neighbors, or the importance of knowing what is written in your own deed, leave a comment with what you would have done in my place. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, save it for later, and subscribe for more stories where patience, proof, and the law hit harder than revenge ever could.